Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Ukraine This Week with me, Don Arleth. The Rome Recovery Conference wrapped up this week with pledges of over 10 billion euros to support Ukraine in its reconstruction. But as the war drags on, U.S. military aid slows and Russian forces continue making territorial gains and launching record number of kamikaze drones over Ukraine. It's still not clear what Ukraine urgently needs first, reconstruction or a way better coordinated Western rescue strategy with more weapons. But before inviting our guests, let's watch this report from Ukraine over the past week.
That's Kyiv on the day when the Ukraine Recovery Conference in Rome began. Russian drones and missiles rocked the capital, killing 2 people and wounding over a dozen. As leaders discussed the post-war reconstruction, the scenes in Kyiv once again demonstrated how distant that prospect is, and how urgently Ukraine's population needs protection. The aim of the Rome conference was to encourage long-term private sector investment in Ukraine. The participants pledged over 10 billion euros to help Kyiv. President Volodymyr Zelensky was among the attendees. His message was blunt. Russia must be pressured into a truce, as it continues to block all peace efforts in Ukraine. The German Chancellor said that Russia must pay for the damages it's caused in Ukraine. According to him, they amount to around 500 billion euro. It was from Rome that the U.S. Special Envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, joined a meeting of the Coalition of the Willing for the first time. The group plans to aid Ukraine following a ceasefire with Russia. At the start of the call, UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer said that Vladimir Putin must be forced to the negotiating table and that the coalition should focus on making peace happen in Ukraine. The past week marks yet another infamous Russian record. On Wednesday, Ukraine was attacked by 728 drones and 13 missiles, according to the Air Force. That's the single largest barrage of the war. The air raid took place after US President Donald Trump criticized his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin, voicing frustration with his unwillingness for peace and threatened additional sanctions.
We get a lot of bullshit thrown at us by Putin, for you want to know the truth. He's very nice all the time, but it turns out to be meaningless.
3 children were among the 27 wounded in Monday's attack on Kharkiv that targeted a residential building and a kindergarten. These chaotic scenes were also recorded in Ukraine's second-largest city on Monday and show the aftermath of yet another drone attack which wounded 16. That's also Monday, hundreds of kilometers away in the southern city of Odessa. And that's Sumy, where 2 people were killed in this strike. These are all scenes from the latest attacks on civilian targets in the Donetsk region. 15 people were killed. This is Dobropilya in the Donetsk region, some 20 kilometers from the front line. It's a Ukrainian logistics hub, where despite the proximity to the battlefields, life went on relatively normally. Recently, however, Russia has intensified FPV drone attacks on the city and its civilian population. Moscow continues its push in the Donetsk region, where a minor Russian advance was reported near Toretsk. Ukrainian authorities said on Friday that within 24 hours, Russians shelled settlements in the Donetsk region 55 times. Over 100 people were evacuated from the frontline area. Amid the intense air attacks and Russia's frontline advances, Donald Trump has vowed to send more US weapons to Ukraine, adding that Kyiv has to be able to defend itself. President Zelensky has said that he ordered intensified contacts with the Americans to obtain critical arms, including air defense. Following a few-day pause, the US supplies of weapons have resumed. The cause for the halt was reportedly due to low US stockpiles. The European Union is working on its 18th sanctions package against Russia. The measures aim to limit Moscow's energy income and disrupt its arms manufacturing. As the final details are being worked out, the European Court of Human Rights has ruled that Moscow was responsible for the downing of Malaysian Airlines flight MH17 over Ukraine back in 2014. 298 people were killed in the incident, most of them Dutch citizens. This case against Russia was brought by Ukraine and the Netherlands, along with 3 others. The court has also found Russia guilty of destruction of civilian infrastructure in Ukraine, murder, torture, rape, and kidnapping of Ukrainian children.
And now joining us is Mykhailyna Skoryk-Shkarivska, member of the Irpin City Council and NGO Smlivi Irpin. Hello, Mykhailyna. Thank you so much for joining us there from Rome.
Good afternoon. Greetings from Rome, where I have finished URC conference.
Yes. Now, this is the fourth recovery conference. What do you think is the difference compared to the previous times, this time in Rome? If you could compare them to some of the other ones. It looked like it was a really big conference with lots of different topics up for debate.
Exactly. A very big amount of different participants from different spheres came to Rome this year. And we have heard very strong messages from European leaders about Ukrainian future, and that was very important for our country, where Kyiv is under the very heavy air attacks from Russian side all those days. So the result of the conference is very important for our country, because we believe that military support and reconstruction support will grow after meetings here in Rome.
Now, for you in Irpin, were you able to get anything concrete for your city?
Our delegation from our city was quite big this year, because we have not only the members of city council, but also leaders of local NGOs, which are very strong and powerful, not locally but globally as well. So we know about signing some memorandums for future reconstruction, especially on reconstruction on the bridge, memorialization and war crimes victims, recording for future investigations of those cases. So we quite satisfied from this conference. Also, our city council did a big networking with European partners for the future twinning cities relations with Italian, French, and some other cities. So we believe that we will enlarge the number of our partners in the nearest future. The main outcome of the conferences like this is that very often the results are not coming day to day, but in 3 months, in 6 months, and we think that networking we did here, that's a good start for future partnership with our European possible cities and towns all over the Europe.
Right, and I think it's particularly important to be down in Italy, where support for Ukraine in this war and a lot of public attention is just not very focused on it. So I think it brings a lot of awareness. Now, over 10 billion euro was pledged at the Rome Recovery Conference. In your view, how significant is this compared to the scale of destruction in your country, in Ukraine as a whole?
Look, the war is ongoing now, and every day we hear and we see new and new destructions. So it's very difficult to count the result of future destructions and calculate the total cost of the money we needed. But I could see on the Irpin sample, Irpin was liberated 3 years ago, and we have done only 70%. Like 40 houses were heavily destroyed, and we demolished them when Irpin was liberated, because this city was partly occupied. And now only one is rebuilding. So we still need, as a city council, like billions hryvnias to reconstruct what was destroyed during 1 month. So you could imagine the request for the money after such a big destroyment all over the country. Like Sumy is under the attack, Kharkiv is under the attack, Kyiv is under the attack almost every night, and Chernihiv is under the attack, the biggest city of our country. So 10 billion, that's a good result of such a conference, but we are negotiating with our partners to have long-term support because we are under the very big attack, and the attacks are not stopping even for one night. You know that.
Right, right. And I've been to Irpin several times, and I've seen the reconstruction efforts. But I've also seen there are certain places where the residents themselves have to raise money and what have you. I mean, do you guys have estimates as to what is currently needed to get the city back to its pre-war state or status?
If you come to Irpin today, you will see like normal city. We still have the same amount of population we had before full-scale invasion, up to 100,000. So it's quite a big town, like we call Irpin City because of that. But at the same time, we have 23,000 IDPs, people who left their homes in other places all over the Ukraine, and they are internally displaced people looking for new place for living, and they look for like social housing to settled on a new place. I also mentioned about 40 houses completely destroyed, and that means that 16,000 people left without their flats and apartments, and they still need to have a new place for living. So threat is big, and we believe that conferences like this one in Rome is helping to keep focus on the needs of the people who lost their place for living and in fact lost their normality of their life, and trying to start all from the beginning.
Certainly, certainly. And, actually, I look at this 10 billion euro pledge, but, over in Belgium, there's 300 billion that's frozen, and there's still problems on transferring that to Ukraine for reconstruction. Yet, at the same time, are we kind of putting the cart in front of the horse when it comes to reconstruction? We need the war to end before we can really, truly undertake the reconstruction of Ukraine. What are your thoughts on that?
Exactly. If we talk about the big reconstruction, we need to finish the war first. We need to win the war. And the defense needs, that's the number one priority now for our country. But at the same time, that's still 36 million nation. This amount of people are living in Ukraine now. So they need houses, they need food, they need jobs, they need businesses to be developed to feed their families. So we have fight and reconstruction at the same time, and that's the everyday necessity. And we see new destroyments, and we see new built houses instead of destroyed ones. So that's everyday process, two at the same time. So I do believe that we need to reconstruct in the places which were liberated and where we don't see like big threats from the troops coming from the border. And at the same time, we are doing evacuation from Sumy region villages to save the lives of the people where attacks are becoming heavily. So that's the reality of the war. To fight and to reconstruct at the same time. And we know that very well from our Irpin City experience.
Indeed, indeed. Mykhailyna Skoryk-Shkarivska, member of the Irpin City Council, thank you so much for joining us from the conference there in Rome.
Thank you.
And now our next guest is Howard J. Shatz, senior economist at RAND, a U.S. nonprofit and nonpartisan organization specializing in research and development. Hello, sir, and thank you so much for joining us on Ukraine This Week.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, now it's estimated, or at least Ukraine estimates, that 524 billion is needed for reconstruction, with at least 40 billion required in 2026 alone. This is quite a significant amount, yet at the same time, we do need a ceasefire before we can get to reconstruction. So in your opinion, where do the priorities lie in this process?
The first The priority right now is to keep the Ukrainian economy functioning, to keep it going, and to keep Ukraine's defense and war effort going. That's where the 40 billion is. So Ukraine needs about 40 billion each year of extra financing for budget support and to run its government, run its programs. That's the highest priority. On the civilian side, on the defense side, the highest priority is air defense. If we think about building for the future or preparing for the future, then Ukraine is going to want to build resilient infrastructure to the extent it can. So prepare distributed electricity generation, buildings that are more resilient to attack. And it's been very good about repairing things. It needs to keep that going as well. So there are immediate needs: maintain the country, maintain the economy, and keep planning for the future needs.
Recently, Germany has announced a purchase of 2 Patriot air defense systems for Ukraine. Norway, I believe, offered to buy 1. By many accounts, this is still too little for the capital's defense, in addition to what they already have. You know, from the United States perspective, we hear different rhetoric coming out of Washington, out of the White House. Is it possible we're going to see an uptick in the deliveries of weapon systems and, well, the resumption of previously promised weapons to Ukraine?
So I would never want to predict what the U.S. administration is going to do, because tactical uncertainty is one of the techniques that this administration uses to forward its policies. But I do think that there are some very positive trends in terms of more U.S. weapons shipments. So one of them is that the Senate itself is very united on support for Ukraine. Second, the decision to not send weapons has been reversed. But third, the United States, through the NATO communique, has recognized Russia as the aggressor. And fourth, let's look at the minerals deal that was signed. That allows weapons shipment to be counted as equity investments in the new fund. So the pathway is being cleared in a couple different directions for further U.S. weapons systems. And there is also discussion of using a U.S. program called foreign military financing to clear the way for the purchase of weapons systems. And that's financing. It can be repaid over long term. So the trends are very positive. But in terms of what will actually happen, I don't think anybody who knows is not going to say, and anybody who talks about what's going to happen probably is not as well informed as they should be.
Well said. In April, Ukrainian government, the Ukrainian government signed a deal with the Trump administration to establish the American-Ukrainian Reconstruction Investment Fund, which will draw cash from Ukraine's national resources. How do you think that these 2 funds are going to be coordinated, and what are the risks that they could overlap?
So it's a real testament to how well Ukrainian government officials are doing. It is not just coordinating the U.S. fund, but Ukraine has a very, very broad set of commitments. It has commitments it needs to make to the European Union for accession. It has commitments it needs to make to the European Union under the Ukraine facility. It has commitments it needs to make to the IMF to keep the program going. And then there may be different donor commitments. So this is an enormous coordination issue, and it's a real testament to Ukrainian government officials, Ministry of Economy, Ministry of Finance, and so on, that they are able to coordinate these and deal with all of these incoming requirements. The U.S. fund should not be difficult to coordinate. The U.S. fund is really aimed at natural resources, and there's a technology dimension too. That should fit into other efforts. And in the creation of the U.S. fund, there is a provision that nothing that it does will contradict what Ukraine has to do for EU accession. So I think the U.S. fund is the least of Ukraine's worries right now.
My previous guest was just telling us that right now the name of the game in Ukraine is to continue to defend the country while reconstructing damaged infrastructure, especially critical infrastructure, but also the economy, keeping the economy and the motors going. Yet we see these attacks night after night on Kyiv, and there are some worries that another refugee wave could go to Europe if these attacks aren't stopped. Is this a real risk that Europeans need to be concerned about, and maybe another reason for them to continue to bolster Ukrainian defense?
The refugee issue is probably the biggest long-term challenge that Ukraine has, even after a settlement. There are millions of refugees in Europe. The longer they stay, the more familiar they'll be, the more they will want to stay because they are building their lives there. And these are people generally prime working age, many women, many children, people who will be extremely valuable for Ukraine when reconstruction starts. There are a variety of things that incentives that the EU and Ukraine can do to bring people back. For example, if the EU says if you go back, but you will be able to retire to the EU if you want afterwards, you will have a right to do that. Or other incentives that let people keep EU benefits over the long term, but allow them to go back to Ukraine to work and live. That's going to be very important. So that's the long-term challenge. For now, yes, people who want to return need housing, they need education, they need health services, they need a functioning economy. And that ties to your other point, which is the infrastructure destruction. The infrastructure destruction has led to international agencies and Ukraine downgrading their expected GDP growth for 2025. Ukraine has done very well, 5.5% in 2023, 2.9% in 2024. They had expected something on the order of 2.5% for 2025. That's been downgraded to about 2%. So the infrastructure attacks are very deleterious to the economy. The other immediate challenge that Ukraine is facing economically is a labor shortage. The labor market is very tight. So you put those together, that's more challenges for Ukraine. And that leads back to air defense is important. Assistance reestablishing infrastructure is important, and there's apparently been a new fund created to do that. And then general support for the economy is going to be important.
At the conference in Rome, there was a lot of talk about garnering more investment in just Ukrainian industry for more Western companies to go and set up shop in Ukraine. Many Western companies have stayed and continue to operate there, but there's the question of security. Is it possible to invest in a country that's still at war?
It is. We'll take another example. So an example of a country with air defense, right? Israel, their economic performance actually was very positive during the recent, very short war with Iran. And their economic performance has been pretty good. They've been attracting a lot of investment ever since October 7th, 2023. So it is possible they have air defense, they have protection, they have a strong military. In terms of Ukraine, and again, everyone you talk to is going to mention air defense, right? That's really important for Ukraine. But in terms of where to invest, most of the Russian attacks are still concentrated in the east and center. The West has been hit a bit more, but the West has been much safer, much more possible for investment. And then the question is, how do you build your facility for resilience? What do you put underground? What do you reinforce? It turns out that Western companies resident in Ukraine are finding these opportunities. They are reinvesting. It's a matter of getting Western companies not in Ukraine to see the opportunities. And something like the Ukraine Recovery Conference can help with that. This year they had special workshops on sectors. They had a business-to-business exchange, which previous conferences didn't have. So more familiarization, insurance for business people to go travel to Ukraine to see what the situation is. There are opportunities there. And in the West, we're finding defense industries in particular are seeing opportunities. Other industries, it's going to be more difficult.
Certainly. Now, finally, if we look at the scale and size of destruction that we've seen in the country in Ukraine, is it comparable to what we've seen in the Balkans? I don't know, post-World War II? President Zelensky also mentioned a Marshall Plan style like plan to be implemented. How do you think that could possibly look?
So I do think that what we see in Ukraine today is very comparable to Europe after World War II. It's comparable to Japan after World War II as well. Less so to the Western Balkans, smaller countries. But if we talk about a big country with massive amounts of destruction, Japan and Europe are very good examples. The, the Marshall Plan was not an issue only of money. The Marshall Plan was an issue of money from the United States, money from European participants. They had to put forward their own funds, and of reforms. And what were those reforms aimed at? Those reforms were aimed at expanding international trade, expanding agricultural and industrial production, and getting the fiscal side of the house in order. So Ukraine is very well placed for this in the sense that it is doing reforms. It is poised to support its agriculture and industrial development. Its trade lanes have been reopened through the Black Sea. Odessa is very important to Ukraine, keeping that port open. And its fiscal house, it has proven to be an adept manager of the budget under very difficult circumstances. What the issue that will come up is how much money is necessary. So we have Western countries, we have the World Bank, we have IMF, and then we have the pool of money that people have been kind of dancing around, and that's the 300 billion in frozen Russian sovereign reserves. I think the sense of the West is more and more leaning towards confiscating that money in some way, looking for a legal avenue. That will be very useful, but the one risk, if all of that money were made available, it would have to be metered very carefully. Ukraine's GDP in 2021, I think, was only about 100 billion or 200 billion. You know, and that money is 300 billion. Imagine flooding Europe or flooding America or flooding another country with something 2 times the size of its current GDP. That would lead to a lot of waste. It would lead to a lot of corruption. And so that's where metering the money and having a solid plan for how that's going to be used is going to be important. And, Ukraine has been planning. Those plans will have to change given new Russian attacks, but having a plan that you can change is much better than having no plan at all. And having a plan now is important. Don't forget, World War II stopped in 1945. The Marshall Plan didn't get started till 1948, a 3-year lag. I don't think Ukraine can afford that. So that's where it's comparable. That's what we can learn from the Marshall Plan. And it should prove to be, if planned well, a very, very good environment for reconstruction and business.
So I guess in summary, having these Ukraine recovery conferences and getting as many people as possible involved is actually beneficial to prepare for what could be ahead of us in the near future, and that is peace, hopefully. My guest, Howard J. Shatz, senior economist at RAND, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate your analysis. Thank you, sir.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
And that's all the time we have on Ukraine This Week. Join us again next week for all the latest developments from the war in Ukraine. Thanks for watching, and see you then.